The night my son would raise a glass to his true family began with a lint roller, scuffed shoes, and a promise I made to myself. I would show up, look him in the eye, and let the past be paid in full. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 68, widower, former mechanic, the kind of man whose hands tell his story before his mouth does. I spent the morning sanding the shine back onto a pair of black Oxfords I've owned since my wife was alive. The leather complained, but it came around. The old charcoal suit hung a little looser than I remembered, so I took in the waist with 2 careful stitches. Tonight wasn't about fashion. It was about being there. Present, decent, undeniable. On the bed lay a small velvet box the color of midnight. Inside, on a cushion that made it look fancier than it ever needed to be, rested a nickel-plated pocket watch with a hairline crack on the back plate. My father's initials, J.H., were still there, shallow from years in an oily palm. I sold that watch 15 years ago to cover my son Daniel's first semester when the scholarship arrived late. I told myself I'd buy it back when things got better. Things didn't, not right away. But last winter, a man at the Sunday flea market rolled it out of a cloth like it was nothing. I knew the crack before I saw the initials. I paid more than it was worth and less than it cost me to lose. I cleaned it with toothpaste and a soft rag until the second hand stopped dragging. The chain felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe that's what redemption weighs. I wrote a card, for time you never saw me spend. Then I crossed it out, too poetic for a man like me, and wrote, "Proud of you. Dad." I slid the card under the velvet lip and closed the lid. It made a quiet sound, like a door deciding not to slam. In the mirror, a stranger looked back, white at the temples, jaw still stubborn, tie almost straight. I tried a smile and got something gentler instead. Fine. Gentler would do. I pressed a thumb to the old burn on my wrist, muffler pipe, 1989, and thought of the nights I worked past midnight so Daniel could have brand new cleats, not the second-hand ones that split at the toe. I thought of the mornings I left notes on the counter when I couldn't wake him, and of the last text he sent that had more punctuation than warmth. Grown men don't beg, I told myself. They show up. A honk from the street snapped the room into the present. The cab idled, blinking its little orange patience. I pocketed my wallet, slid the velvet box into the inside breast, the place a heart is supposed to be, and reached for the only cufflinks I own, cheap steel that pretends to be silver. The left one wouldn't catch. My fingers are good at bolts, not jewelry. I laughed once under my breath and tried again. It held. On my way out, I stopped at the small shelf by the door. 3 framed photos. Daniel with frosting on his forehead at 7. Daniel and me under the hood of a rusted Pontiac, his grin wider than the grill. Daniel in a graduation robe, looking past the camera. I dusted the glass with my sleeve, then locked the apartment and took the stairs. Elevator's been moody since July. Where to? The driver asked. St. James on Maple, then the reception hall on Crescent. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The city slid by like a film I'd seen too many times. The diner where they still know my coffee. The shop with bait and miracles. The alley where teenagers practice being loud. I checked the watch. It ticked like it trusted me again. I imagined Daniel's face when he opened the box. Maybe he'd run a thumb over the crack and understand what it meant when a man gives up something that was supposed to outlive him. Maybe he'd say, "You didn't have to," and I'd say, "I wanted to." Simple as lug nuts. Traffic slowed near Maple. 2 limos waited at the curb like silent promises. People in good clothes laugh the way people do when they're sure they're on the right side of a story. I paid the fare and stepped out into the smell of cut flowers and fresh rain on stone. At the church door, my hand went without thinking to the inside pocket, to make sure the velvet was still there, that the seconds were where they should be. They were. I took a breath I meant to be deep and ended up catching on something smaller. Nerves, probably. Or hope, which is worse. Dad? I practiced it once under my breath, the way I thought he might say it. Then I pushed the door and walked into the music. I didn't know it yet, but by the time that watch made it back to my palm, someone else would be holding the microphone, and the room would not be laughing. The doors of St. James opened with a groan that sounded older than the building itself. The air was thick with lilies and candle wax, and the organist played the kind of hymn that should have lifted my heart. Instead, it pressed me further down. I straightened my tie one last time, holding on to the thought that today was supposed to be about family. My family. An usher in a black suit met me at the aisle with a practiced smile. "Name, sir?" "Robert Hayes, father of the groom." I expected him to nod and gesture me toward the front. Instead, he ran a finger down the seating chart, frowned, and pointed. "Row 5, sir." "This way, row 5. My throat tightened. I looked ahead. The first 3 pews reserved with crisp white cards, each chair perfectly aligned. Empty for now, but waiting for the faces that were supposed to matter most. My face, I thought, should have been among them. Instead, I followed the usher, my shoes echoing too loudly as I slipped into a seat among strangers. The woman beside me wore perfume so strong it stung. She leaned toward me politely. "Are you with the bride's side?" I forced a smile. "Groom's. I'm his father." Her eyes flickered with surprise before she turned back to her program. No further questions, no warmth. To her, I was just another guest who'd been put in the wrong place. From where I sat, I could see Daniel at the altar. My son. He stood tall in a tailored navy suit, his hair combed back just so. But his attention wasn't on me. He bent close to Sophie's mother, whispering something that made her laugh as if he were her boy and not mine. She reached up to fix his boutonniere, and he hugged her with the ease of long practice. The sight knocked something loose in me, as if all those nights I had carried him in my arms meant nothing now. The organs swelled. Every head turned toward the door. Sophie appeared, radiant in satin and lace, her father beaming as he escorted her down the aisle. The guests sighed in unison. Daniel's face lit up brighter than I had seen in years, but he never once looked past her to where I sat in the 5th row. I whispered the vows along with him, words I had once spoken myself, though mine had been followed by decades of work, sacrifice, and loss. The ceremony ended in applause and petals. The crowd spilled into the reception hall, a ballroom draped in candles and white roses. I lingered at the entrance, searching for my name on the seating chart. My finger trailed down the list until it stopped at table 11. I looked again. Not a mistake. Table 11, near the kitchen doors. The clatter of dishes and the rush of waiters drowned out the music where I was placed. My table mates were polite but distant, second cousins of Sophie's, a colleague of her father, a pair of guests I'd never seen before. We exchanged shallow pleasantries until the conversation died. None of them asked who I was, so I told them anyway. "I'm the groom's father." The words sounded heavier than I intended, like a stone dropped into shallow water. They nodded, offered weak smiles, then returned to their plates. I might as well have been invisible. From across the room, Daniel raised his glass, laughing with Sophie's friends, his arm draped casually around his new mother-in-law. Cameras flashed as though the world revolved around that embrace. My son looked every bit the man of the hour, handsome, confident, surrounded by people who adored him. Yet the one man who had given him everything sat pressed against a drafty wall by the swinging kitchen door. The food arrived late at our table, lukewarm and soggy from the journey. My fork scraped the plate while the laughter from the head table carried across the hall. I watched Daniel lean close to Sophie's mother again, whispering in her ear. She dabbed her eyes with a napkin, as if she alone understood the weight of the moment. The velvet box in my pocket felt heavier with every passing minute. I touched it once, checking it was still there, pressed against my chest. The pocket watch ticked, faithful as ever, though I wondered if Daniel would even recognize what it meant. The hall sparkled with chandeliers, but where I sat, the light seemed dull. Each laugh from Daniel cut sharper, each toast louder, each hug further proof that my seat, my role, had been reassigned. Invisible. That's what I was. At my own son's wedding. And though I didn't know it then, the worst was still waiting. Wrapped not in silence, but in words spoken into a microphone for the whole room to hear. The reception hall glowed like a palace. Chandeliers raining light on polished floors, laughter bouncing off the high ceiling. From where I sat, near the swinging doors to the kitchen, I caught fragments of conversations, but none of them belonged to me. I chewed through lukewarm chicken, barely tasting it, waiting for the moment when Daniel might look my way, wave me forward, acknowledge me as more than a name on a seating chart. I told myself it would happen during the speeches. Toasts have a way of circling back to the people who matter, and I had to matter. Didn't I? The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, and the crowd hushed. He introduced Daniel, and my son stood tall at the head table, glass of champagne in hand. My chest swelled with something close to pride. This was it. He'd talk about perseverance, about where he came from, about family. First, I want to thank everyone who's here tonight, Daniel began. His voice was clear, confident, carrying across the hall. Friends who stood by me, colleagues who became brothers, mentors who showed me the way. The audience applauded warmly. He gestured to Sophie, radiant beside him, and to her parents, who dabbed at their eyes. And to my new family, the ones who've welcomed me without hesitation. You've given me more than I ever dreamed. I waited. Surely my name was next. Surely after all those introductions he'd turn to me. But I've also learned, Daniel continued, that family isn't just blood. Family is the people who choose you, who celebrate you, who lift you higher. The room erupted in applause. My throat closed. Blood family. Was I not even worth a mention? He raised his glass higher, eyes scanning the room. For the first time all evening, they found mine. That should have been a bridge. Instead, it felt like a blade. There are people, he said, voice steady, who don't deserve to be part of this moment. People who bring nothing but bitterness and negativity into our lives. Tonight, I'm choosing who belongs in my family. Every head turned, as if choreographed. I felt their eyes on me before he said it. My fingers tightened around the edge of the tablecloth. Dad, he said, his tone like ice. You can leave. The words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. But the silence that followed proved me wrong. 200 guests, frozen mid-breath, all of them watching the groom dismiss his father like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong hall. The napkin slipped from my lap to the floor. I bent to pick it up, not out of need, but to hide the tremor in my hands. My suit, the one I'd pressed so carefully, felt suddenly ridiculous, a costume for a part I was no longer allowed to play. I rose slowly, forcing my legs to carry me upright. The scrape of my chair against the tile echoed too loud. Murmurs began, some shocked, some curious, some pitying. I caught the whisper of a woman at the next table. That's his father. Heat burned up my neck. My mouth was dry, my vision blurred at the edges. Still, I kept my chin high. If I had to leave, I would leave with dignity. The velvet box in my pocket pressed against my chest. I thought of handing it to Daniel anyway, pressing it into his palm before I walked out. But my hand wouldn't move. He didn't want it. He didn't want me. I took my first step toward the exit. The music had stopped. Even the waitstaff had frozen, trays hovering mid-air. It was as though the entire hall had turned into a courtroom, and I was the guilty man being escorted out. I reached the edge of the dance floor. My heart pounded in my ears. Then behind me a chair scraped. Another figure was rising. The room stirred, a ripple of surprise. It wasn't me they were watching anymore. The sound of that chair scraping still rings in my ears. I turned, half dreading, half hoping, and saw Ethan Reed, the best man, Daniel's old college friend, rise from his seat. His jaw was set, his eyes burning with something I hadn't seen since my days in the shop. A young man ready to stand where no one else dared. He walked toward the head table, ignoring Sophie's startled glance and Daniel's frown. With steady hands, Ethan took the microphone. His voice carried the weight of the silence Daniel had created. Before Mr. Hayes leaves, he said, glancing at me, there are a few things everyone here should know. The hall stirred. Daniel's face went pale. Ethan, sit down. This isn't your place. Ethan shook his head. It became my place the moment you asked me to stand beside you as your best man. That comes with responsibility. And if you won't honor your father tonight, then I will. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sophie's eyes darted between the two men she thought she knew best. Ethan turned toward the guests. Daniel has told me stories about his father for years, stories that painted him as bitter, as controlling, as someone best kept at arm's length. I believed those stories, until I decided to see for myself. Every word cut through the room like steel. I gripped the back of my chair to steady myself. I learned, Ethan continued, that Robert Hayes worked double shifts at a mechanic's garage for decades, patching up other people's cars so his son could have more than he ever did. I learned he sold his father's pocket watch, his only inheritance, to pay Daniel's first semester of college. And I learned he never bought another suit, never took another trip, never remarried, because every dime and every ounce of energy went into raising the boy sitting at that head table. Whispers rose. Some guests covered their mouths. Others turned to look at Daniel as though they didn't recognize him. Ethan's voice grew stronger. Robert didn't walk away when life got hard. He stayed. He sacrificed. He gave Daniel the chance to become the man he is today. And this? He pointed to the table where I had been hidden near the kitchen doors. This is how he is repaid? By being shoved to the margins at his own son's wedding. By being told to leave in front of 200 people. The champagne in Sophie's glass trembled. Her hand shook as she set it down. Daniel, Ethan said, turning to him directly, I can't stand by and watch you humiliate the man who gave you everything. If this is what marriage means to you, cutting out the people who sacrificed for you, then I won't be part of it. And Sophie, I won't let you marry into a lie. The room froze. Daniel stammered, face flushed. You don't understand. He's always enough. Sophie's voice cracked, sharp against the hush. She pushed back her chair, rising to her feet. Tears glittered in her eyes. I can't do this. Daniel turned, panicked. Sophie, wait. He's twisting things, but she stepped away, shaking her head. No, Daniel. He's not twisting anything. He's showing me the man I'd be marrying, and I can't. She pulled the ring from her finger, her hands trembling as she set it on the table in front of him. A collective gasp swept through the room. Cameras lowered. Phones paused midair. The bride had just ended the wedding before the cake had even been cut. Daniel's face collapsed into disbelief. He reached for Sophie, but she backed away, her white dress swishing like a curtain closing on a play. You told me your father was a burden, she whispered, her voice cracking. But now I see the burden has been you all along. She turned and left the hall, heels striking the marble floor like a gavel. I stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding, unsure whether to weep or to breathe. 2 hours earlier, I thought the worst that could happen was being ignored. Now, the woman my son was about to marry had walked away because someone finally told the truth. Ethan set the microphone down. He didn't look at Daniel. He looked at me. And in that gaze, for the first time all night, I felt seen. The night after the wedding felt unreal. I sat in Michael's living room, the television muted, both of us staring at the flickering images without caring what they showed. The silence between brothers who'd known each other all their lives was a kind of comfort. He didn't ask. I didn't explain. He had seen enough. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Daniel. Again. Dad, I didn't mean it like that. Another buzz. You made me look bad. Why didn't you just leave quietly? I didn't reply. The words blurred on the screen, as if refusing to make sense. My brother poured 2 fingers of bourbon into mismatched glasses. He slid one to me. Don't read them, he said. But I did. I always did. Years of habit. Picking up the phone, giving him the benefit of the doubt, hoping the next message would sound like love. Buzz. You know how stressed I was. You know I didn't mean to humiliate you. Buzz, if you walk away from me now, you're no better than Mom was. That one landed hard. He'd never used her memory against me before. I put the glass down untouched. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Rob, listen to me. This is manipulation. Plain and simple. He's not apologizing. He's shifting blame. I wanted to argue, but my throat locked. Because deep down I knew Michael was right. Daniel had been rewriting our history for years, and I let him. I typed a reply. Erased it, then typed again. Daniel, I'm not talking to you until you get help. I stared at the words, thumb hovering over, send. Michael touched my shoulder. Make it stronger. Draw the line. So I added, no more calls. No more texts. When you're in therapy, when you show me change, not just words, then we'll talk. Until then, I'm done rescuing you. My thumb pressed send. The message shot into the dark like a flare. Almost instantly, the phone buzzed again. Therapy? You think I'm crazy? You're the one who embarrassed me in front of everyone. I didn't reply. Another buzz. I lost Sophie because of you. My hand clenched, but Michael's voice cut through. Don't. He lost her because of himself. Don't take that weight. I set the phone face down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. Later that night, as we sat on Michael's porch, the crickets filling the silence, he spoke what I'd been afraid to admit. You raised him alone. You gave him everything. But somewhere along the way, he learned to take without giving. If you don't stop it now, Rob, it'll never stop. I rubbed my palms together, rough from decades of grease and wrenches. He's my son, and you're his father, not his servant. Sometimes the best thing a father can do is step back and let a man face the consequences of his choices. The words settled heavy but true. I thought about the pocket watch, still in my suit jacket upstairs, unopened, unclaimed. I thought about Sophie walking away in her wedding dress, and Ethan's steady voice cutting through lies. And I thought about Daniel, alone somewhere, blaming me instead of facing himself. That night, as I lay on the couch at Michael's, phone buzzing with messages I refused to read, I realized something I never had before. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender, and I had surrendered long enough. 2 weeks passed before I saw Ethan again. I was back at my apartment, fixing a leaky faucet that wouldn't stop whining, when the knock came at the door. I opened it to find him standing there in a crisp shirt, no tie, eyes tired but determined. Mr. Hayes, he said, shifting on his feet. Can we talk? I stepped aside. The place smelled faintly of coffee grounds and engine oil. Old habits die hard. He looked around, respectful, then sat where I gestured. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been thinking about you since the wedding, he began. What I saw that night. The way you stood, the way you carried yourself. Even after everything Daniel said, it stayed with me. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Ethan pulled out a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. I'm starting something, a place called The Forge. Think of it as a community workshop, a space where older men, guys who've been pushed aside, can come together. Marcenaria mecánica, small trades, but more than that, a place where they're respected, where their experience matters. I want you to help me run it. I blinked at the blueprints. Lines and sketches of a warehouse converted into an open floor plan. Workbenches, tool racks, a coffee station in the corner. In the margins, words scribbled. Mentorship, support groups, skill classes. Why me? I asked. Because you're exactly the man they need to see, he said without hesitation. You know sacrifice. You know resilience. And you've lived through the kind of loneliness too many men don't talk about. You could walk into that space, roll up your sleeves, and every guy there would believe in the possibility of starting over, because you did. I sat back, staring at the folder. My hands itched at the thought of sawdust, of engines humming, of guiding someone else through the stubborn bolt on a carburetor. But more than that, the idea of belonging again tugged at something deep inside me. Still, doubt whispered. I've spent my life under hoods and on shop floors, Ethan. I'm no leader. I wouldn't know where to start. You don't have to, he replied. I've got the funding, the permits, the logistics. What I don't have is the soul. I can't fake experience I never lived. You can. His conviction was unsettling and strangely steadying. That night I barely slept, replaying his words. By morning I called him back. I'll try, I said. The Forge opened 3 months later in an old warehouse on the edge of town. The first week, only 5 men showed up. A retired truck driver, a widowed teacher, 2 ex-factory hands, and a veteran who carried silence like armor. We swept floors, oiled tools, drank bitter coffee from a donated machine. Nothing grand, nothing polished. But by the end of the month, 15 men came through those doors. Word spread. Soon we had workshops, basic carpentry, small engine repair, even leather work. Men who'd been sitting at home staring at walls found themselves building tables, fixing lawnmowers, sharing stories that had been rusting inside for years. And somehow, I became the one they turned to. The man who showed them how to measure twice and cut once. The man who told them it was all right to start over, no matter how late the hour. One evening, after the last saw had quieted and the floor smelled of pine shavings, Ethan clapped a hand on my shoulder. Look around, Mr. Hayes. This exists because of you." I looked at the men gathered at the tables, laughing over mugs of coffee, trading phone numbers like old friends. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like a cornerstone, and the watch in my pocket ticked steady, as if it too had found a reason to keep going. 6 months later, I stood in front of a mirror I barely recognized. The man staring back at me wore a clean navy blazer, hair trimmed neat, shoulders straighter than they'd been in years. Not because of the jacket or the haircut, but because I finally had something to stand tall for. The forge was no longer a dusty warehouse with a handful of volunteers. It had become a beating heart for men who thought their best years were behind them. In half a year, we'd helped 27 men find steady jobs, mechanics, carpenters, even 2 who started small businesses of their own. 15 fathers had reconnected with their children after years of silence. 40 men showed up every week for workshops, and even more for the evening coffee hours, where the talk ranged from tool brands to how to say, "I'm sorry," to a daughter. The night of the official inauguration, the hall was packed. City officials, reporters with cameras, families, neighbors, people I'd never met before but who wanted to see what all the noise was about. The once empty warehouse glowed with light, benches polished, banners strung high, the forge, a place to begin again. Ethan opened the ceremony with his easy confidence, thanking donors, volunteers, and the city council for their support. Then he stepped aside and called my name. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the mic, "none of this would exist without Robert Hayes. He is the soul of the forge." Applause rose, sharp and generous. My knees wavered. I walked to the podium, the spotlight hot on my shoulders. For a moment, the sound of the crowd blurred into the memory of that wedding hall, the silence, the stares, the shame. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to look up. This wasn't the same story anymore. I cleared my throat. 6 months ago, I sat at the back of a room where I didn't belong. At least that's what I was told. My own son looked me in the eye and said I should leave. That night, I believed maybe he was right, that maybe I had no place left. The room hushed, the weight of my words pinning the air. But then, someone gave me a chance to see myself different. To take all the years I thought were wasted, all the nights under car hoods, all the mornings I left before sunrise, and turn them into something useful. Not just for me, but for others who know what it's like to feel discarded. I glanced across the hall. Rows of men who'd walked through our doors in silence now sat with heads high, families beside them. I saw Tom, who hadn't spoken to his daughter in 12 years, holding her hand. I saw Ray, once drowning in debt, now running a small repair business with 2 apprentices, and I saw hope reflected back at me, real and solid. "My name is Robert Hayes," I said, voice steady now. "I'm not just someone's father. I'm not just a man who got pushed aside. I'm proof that it's never too late to start again. And so are all of you." The applause thundered, people on their feet, clapping until the sound shook the rafters. I stepped back, heart pounding, a heat rising behind my eyes I didn't bother to hide. For years I'd been the invisible man in my own family. Tonight, in this forge of wood, steel, and second chances, I was more than seen. I was needed, and I knew then, with absolute certainty, that the story of my life was no longer about rejection. It was about what I chose to build after. 2 years passed before I saw Daniel again. By then, the forge had grown into more than I ever imagined. We had opened 2 new branches in nearby towns, welcomed over 200 men through our doors, and helped rebuild lives I once thought were beyond repair. My days were filled with purpose, my nights with the kind of sleep that comes only when a man knows he is exactly where he belongs. One autumn afternoon, I was sorting through a stack of blueprints for a new workshop when the office door creaked open. I looked up and froze. Daniel stood there, thinner, older in the eyes, his shoulders not as square as the last time I saw him. His suit was simple, not flashy, and he carried no audience with him, just himself. For the first time in years, he looked like a man, not a show. "Dad," he said, voice low, careful. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit between us. The silence of every unanswered call, every bitter word, every wound he'd carved. Then I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat, folding his hands like a student about to confess, "I've been in therapy," he began, "for almost 2 years now, and I've been volunteering at a shelter. Men who've lost jobs, families, everything. They reminded me of you. They reminded me of what I threw away." I studied him, waiting for the old tricks, the blame, the excuses, the sideways digs. None came. His voice trembled, but it carried something I hadn't heard in a long time. Humility. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he continued, "but I want to earn it. I want a chance to be your son again, not in name, but in truth. Please, let me try." The words cracked something in me, but not in the way they used to. I felt the urge to stand, to pull him into an embrace, to let years of hurt wash away. But I didn't, because I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Love without boundaries turns to poison. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Daniel, I'm glad you've started changing, truly. But my life doesn't orbit around you anymore. I don't need your approval, or even your love, to feel whole. I built something real here. I found my worth." His eyes glossed with tears, but he nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. "If you want a place in my life," I said steady, "you'll have to prove it with actions, not speeches. Show me through the choices you make, through the man you decide to be, that you can stand beside me without tearing me down. Until then, we keep it simple. Calls now and then, maybe a coffee. But the rest, you'll have to earn." Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand. "That's fair," he whispered. "More than fair." We sat in silence, the hum of the workshop filling the room, the sound of saws, hammers, voices of men who had once been broken finding their rhythm again. I realized then how far I had come. 2 years ago I left a wedding in disgrace. Now I sat in an office built on respect, while my son asked me for a chance to re-enter my life. When he finally rose to leave, he extended his hand. I shook it, not with the grip of a father clinging to a son, but with the steady hand of a man meeting another on equal ground. As the door closed behind him, I touched the pocket watch resting in my vest. It ticked steady, unfazed by the years. Time moves forward, it seemed to remind me. And so must we.